favorite things to talk about here at Rebel News is just how out of touch the Liberals are, because there is no lack of proof, text for just how out of touch they are and how entitled they truly are. One of my largest stories here at Rebel News over the course of 8 years was uncovering the hundreds of thousands of dollars in in-flight catering that the Trudeau Liberals spent on, I think it was 5 or 6 international flights. I mean, it was just enormous while Canadian families are struggling to make ends meet because of carbon taxes and government precipitated inflation. It just shows that the Liberals are living in a completely different world, disconnected from the average Canadian citizen. And one of the other people, I think, in Canada who really enjoys, although that probably might be the wrong word, enjoys going through just the countless, endless ways the government continues to blow our money on themselves, is Franco Terrazzano from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Franco, thanks so much for coming on the show. You have a very recent news release about your opinion, and I think the majority of Canadians paying attention share it, that Justin Trudeau just needs to rein in the cost of these out-of-control, high-flying international trips.
Well, you mentioned out of touch, and I don't think I could even come up with a more out-of-touch story than this. The Trudeau government spending $61,000 to stay in a fancy hotel in New York City to attend an anti-poverty summit. Did you hear that, folks? This is how the Trudeau government fights poverty, by staying in a 5-star hotel in Manhattan and spending $61,000 on hotel rooms. Not even to mention the cost of the flights or other meals. So here's a question. How many people do you think the government lifted out of poverty by spending $61,000 on a 5-star hotel? I don't think very many, unfortunately.
You know, I drilled down on the per room costs here, and I think there was some rooms that were in excess of $1,000 a night. So, you know, the $61,000 covers the whole delegation. But why are you bringing an entire delegation to New York, by the way? I was told that I could go to church on Zoom, so they can attend their anti-poverty conferences via Zoom. But, I mean, they weren't reining in the cost of the individual rooms either.
Well, I guess Trudeau had to bring his official photographer and videographer. I mean, how else is Trudeau going to fight poverty, right? But no, Sheila, all kidding aside, I mean, you're absolutely right. At one point, they booked 39 hotel rooms. Why are they bringing a band of bureaucrats to go to this 2-day summit? And to your point, we've heard countless times, hey, zoom in, don't go to the meetings when you don't have to, right? Stay at home. Well, here's the thing. This is becoming the rule, not the exception with this government, because the government doesn't just rack up these huge tabs as a tactic to fight poverty. It's also racking up huge tabs flying international as its tactic to fight climate change, right? Let's not forget about COP26, the UN's climate conference GABFest, where Canada sent about 276 delegates. It was the largest delegation of any G7 country, including the host, United Kingdom. Isn't that something?
But it's also not fighting climate change. It's also virtue signaling. So, you know, in your press release, you note that the Governor General spent $700,000 on a 4-day trip to a German book fair. Why is she at a German book fair? What's the value for Canadians there?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we know that the government loves spending buckets of cash so they can fly international and go to these fancy fairs and stay in these fancy hotels and eat that fancy food. But what value, if any, are taxpayers getting for it? And you know, let me just go back to the COP26 example, because this is just so outrageous. You know, fighting climate change gets very expensive when your finance minister books a hotel in the wrong city. Right? She stayed about 80 kilometers away from the actual conference. And of course, they had to book a luxury chauffeur service to cart Freeland back and forth between the city and the hotel. Now, you mentioned the Governor General. She doesn't fly on the cheap. We all remember that week-long trip her and her band of bureaucrats took going to Dubai for Expo 2020. The entire trip cost more than $1 million. It was only a week, folks, and they spent almost $100,000 on airplane food.
It's crazy. I mean, it is absolutely insane. And then there's the symptom of Justin Trudeau of him wanting to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. Canadian Taxpayers Federation, you guys were so instrumental in getting to the bottom of this and naming and shaming what was going on here when Justin Trudeau spent $6,000 per night for a luxury suite to attend the Queen's funeral. Now, that's just one part of this. He didn't want to tell anybody that it was him being the princess and the pea at the Queen's funeral, but the hotel expense for the entire trip was nearly $500,000.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, look, this is such a waste of taxpayers' money when you're talking about the government could have saved money by staying at the Shangri-La, right? That's how you know they really spared no expense. You know what I mean? But look, let's even put the money aside because we all know spending $6,000 on a hotel room while Canadians can barely make it paycheck to paycheck is a crazy amount of money, and that's just pure waste, okay? But what really irks me is that the government wasted our money and didn't want to come clean with us. Remember the months and months and months of them essentially pulling out all the stops so that Canadians didn't know who stayed in that room, right? Like, let's be honest, you didn't have to be Sherlock Holmes to figure out it was Justin Trudeau who stayed in that luxurious hotel suite, but he has a duty to tell us. In fact, we filed an access to information request. The bureaucrats wrote down Justin Trudeau's name down, and then they blacked it out. They redacted it. Now, we don't think that would pass the sniff test, so we hired some lawyers. We launched a legal challenge to force the government to come clean. Trudeau knew he was going to lose in court, so he finally fessed up and admitted that it was him who stayed in the $6,000 per night hotel room, but he did so the day before, or just hours before President Biden came to town. He tried to bury the story.
That was an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show. I'm Ezra Levant. Every weekday, I do a monologue about the topic of the day. Then I interview a fascinating guest either in studio or via Skype. And then I read your mail, whether it's fan mail or hate mail, which is sometimes even more interesting. This is on our premium service, though, called Rebel News Plus. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. It's $8 a month or less if you buy a whole year in advance. You get my show every weeknight, plus Sheila Gunn Reid's show every week. It's called The Gun Show. It's pretty amazing. You know, we rely on you because we do not take a dime from the government. In Canada, that makes us almost unique. So please help us out and help yourself to some great journalism at rebelnewsplus.com.